I'm Liz Sweigart. I have the honor this year of being the president of SCP, and I am really excited for today's conversation with my friend and colleague, Clark Flynt-Barr, uh, getting into AI scams and how we can identify them, how we can do our best to insulate, inoculate, and protect ourselves from them, and how we can also help our clients as they are now experiencing these types of scams being perpetrated on them and their organizations. And so I am really excited that we have an expert of Clark's caliber with us. So Clark's career spans many iconic places, starting with internships at the Senate and the U.S. Department of State, almost 4 years as an intelligence analyst with the FBI. She and I know each other through the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency, and now in her role as the Government Affairs Director for AARP. Most recently, I guess it was a couple of months ago, Clark and I were at an AI fraud simulation in Washington, D.C. that was hosted by the Alliance for Innovative Regulation. And Clark's panel was addressing exactly this topic while I was on a team that was trying to develop a plan for combating these types of scams. So it's extremely timely, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have Clark with us. And so welcome everyone. And Clark, I'd want to just, what did I leave out from your intro?
Let's see. Well, the reason that I was in the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency, I also worked for a company that did cryptocurrency tracing, and we of course have seen a huge uptick in crypto being used to move money in scams. As we did a lot of fraud prevention work there too. But yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we will get right into it. I'm curious to know what you're seeing right now in terms of the prevalence and type of AI-driven scams that are out in the market. I know our members are very familiar with the ones that we have been impacted by lately. People impersonating me, asking members to send money. And I mean, as recently as last week, someone actually placing phone calls to our members, pretending to be from our conference hotel, trying to get credit card numbers, dates of birth, home addresses, things of that nature. So this is clear and present for us. What are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's clear that scams have really taken off. They've really skyrocketed, and with that, the losses have as well. Um, and we see criminals are incredibly creative, and so they will take any approach they possibly can. And AI is helping in that it can help you better tailor your message to your potential victim. So if you're targeting someone in Idaho, for example, and pretending to be the IRS and saying, you owe taxes, and we need you to go put money in this cryptocurrency ATM. So they would probably call it a special government payment machine. You could use AI to better tailor it and tailor your messaging so that you're using the right slang there, or that you're using like stinker stations, which are that's the reason I use Idaho. I think that is a charming gas station brand, which we do not have in DC. But you can use it to much better tailor your messaging, the slang that you're using, the locations you're using, and it just helps you as a criminal to do this at a much larger scale and much faster. So we've seen the fraud losses really skyrocket. I was comparing numbers from 2014 from the FBI, when the US had about $800 million in fraud losses compared to 2024, a decade later, there was a 2,000% increase in losses. So in 2024, there was $16.6 billion. And we see that across all age groups, right? I think there's this stereotype that it's just old people who fall for scams, but really this is something that is experienced across the board by people of all ages. And actually the FTC data was showing that millennials and Gen X are more likely to report scams, but older people are losing more money when it happens to them. They've spent their life saving, they have houses, they have assets that they're able to liquidate when they think something has happened where they feel like they need to address an issue like having to pay the government, or if they're in a romance scam. And so we've seen this real proliferation of different types of scams, and they're very tailored too, right? Like, so you can get if you're targeting somebody who's younger, you might use a much different approach than you are with someone older. And you can buy all sorts of data from data brokers, which are not terribly well regulated here in the United States, and you could feed that into AI and get it to help you with different potential approaches. So it's pretty scary, and the examples that you gave are a great example of that. We also hear about the deep fakes happening pretty often, where somebody will use the voice of a loved one, or they'll hear the voice of what they think is their loved one, who is panicking, and there's just this sense of urgency that's imparted, combined with a very real sounding mimic of their loved one's voice. It's very hard to tell for people like that it's not real, especially as the technology gets better and better.
Absolutely. And I just want to key in on something you brought up there with the deep fakes and the voice technology and the video technology and the ability to truly impersonate someone. And as you said, they'll use tactics like they will make the person sound panicked. They will create an artificial sense of urgency. And one of the things that never sort of ceases to amaze me is no matter how much we, and when I speak to we, I mean the people on this call, are deeply steeped in psychology. And we understand these techniques, we understand the strategies that are being used. In the moment, it is very hard to pull yourself out and almost dissociate in a way, to be able to evaluate what's happening in your reaction. So I'm curious, especially in your role at AARP, I know you're doing a lot of prevention work. What are you seeing emerging as, for lack of a better phrase, the best practices for recognizing and trying to avoid being pulled into one of these scams?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think oftentimes people want to dig into like what are all of the very different types of scams, and like how does a romance scam differ from an investment scam, and how does an investment scam differ from tech support scams. But I think the thing that is the most important to remember is that there is like a core scam DNA, my colleague Amy likes to call it, where there is a clear pattern. You are going to get outreach from somebody you don't know, or it might be impersonating someone you know, but they're approaching you, not the other way around. They will impart a sense of urgency, like saying, one of the examples that we've heard a lot about is people will get calls from somebody pretending to be a loved one who has just been in a car accident. Usually it's, I've just been in a car accident, I hit a pregnant woman, now I'm in jail, and my lawyer is going to call you. And so there's that like fear and sense of urgency that comes with that. You're panicking, you're worried about the car accident, you're worried about your loved one being in jail. So they have reached out to you, there's a sense of urgency, and then they will ask you for either personal information or money, access to money in some way. And so if you just boil it down to those three things, that you're like, this is what a scam looks like, it's much easier, I think, to differentiate. And so even if you really think this is a legitimate call from your kid, because of all of the technology that allows you to spoof things, being able to say, you know what, I have to hang up and I'm going to call you back. Because oftentimes if their phone number has been spoofed, they'll answer and have no idea what you're talking about, right? And so taking that break and saying, okay, wait, I'm gonna contact them directly because this doesn't make sense to me, is a good way to protect yourself. Um, Another thing that can be helpful if you have is with your bank is having a trusted contact on your banking account, um, who the bank can contact. Not all banks offer this. All banks are legally authorized to offer this, but not all banks offer it at this point. And that person would not be allowed to make transactions on your behalf, but they're an extra person that the bank can call if they think there's something suspicious. This is much more widespread in the securities industry than it is in the banking industry, but I think it's a really good tool. And then there are a lot of other things you can do to protect yourself, like making sure that your credit is frozen so nobody can open credit in your name. And you have to do that, unfortunately, with all of the different credit bureaus, all three of the major credit bureaus. NerdWallet has a really good article on how to do that step by step. And then doing, basic cybersecurity things like making sure you're not reusing passwords, using complex passwords, using multi-factor authentication, and really just protecting your account so that nobody can access them, but you is, I think particularly important.
It's so interesting to me that given how high tech these scams are, our best defenses are entirely human. So our best defenses are, first, as you said, knowing how to calm our own nervous system so that we don't get into this sort of cortisol stress spiral where we can't make good decisions. Our brains are hardwired to go into fight or flight mode. This is something incredibly distressing, as you said. I mean, to get a call from someone who either sounds like a loved one or sounds like they're an authority figure.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know about experiments that have been done to show how human beings respond to perceived authority figures. To be able to pull ourselves out in that moment, pause, reflect, regulate. And that's a very human. That's not a. There's no app for that. I mean, I guess you can use a meditation app, but in the sense that like that is a very human way to respond. And then secondarily, the best advice seems to be phone a friend. I mean, the best advice seems to be to try to not do everything through the technological channels that you're being sort of led to. Oh, look, there's AI putting a thumbs up on my screen. But not to respond in those tech channels, but instead to try to step outside of them, because your scammer is trying to keep you on very narrow rails.
Yeah.
And they're trying to box you into like their space of communication and control. And so by stepping outside of that and calling your family member, or if you can't reach that person, calling someone else adjacent to them. I mean, that's a way that you can get a sense as to what's going on, but it really does warp reality. I had an experience a few months ago where I got a deep fake phone call, and it almost like I realized very quickly what it was, because I had literally just talked to this person, so I knew what was going on. But what was really scary to me about or not scary, but it was so strange. It was like waking up from a really vivid dream and remembering an extremely vivid dream where it's like, I know this isn't reality, but it feels real.
Mhm.
And I think it's just how these technologies now can really deceive all of your senses, and send you into this sort of overdrive. So I've been fortunate so far. Um, I have not been personally impacted, by one of these scams, but I think, if we asked her a show of hands, I'm pretty sure everybody on this call has, if not been affected themselves, they know someone who has. Um, it's really hard.
It is, yeah.
What 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 is the advice that you give to people who have been taken in by one of these scams, to people who have unfortunately fallen prey to these scammers? What do you do?
Yeah, so I think that um, once this has unfortunately happened to you, and I just want to go back to a point you were making earlier, because it was a very good point, and I think it's something else to think about. Like if this starts happening, you were talking about the importance of having a phone a friend, like call somebody you can trust, and that is a really great thing to do. Like if something feels a little bit off or seems too good to be true, calling somebody you trust is a great way to just get confirmation that like this just feels wrong, right? And scammers know that people want to do that, and so they will keep you on the phone for hours and hours. And we hear from victims who are like, I became sort of delirious because they wouldn't let me get off the phone. They contacted me nonstop for days. Like through the night, I was kept on the phone, and I was kept in the, and so you're losing with all of that sleep deprivation. You're also losing your ability to make proper judgment. Um, but yes, once a scam has happened, it's important that you block contact with that person. Contact your financial institutions immediately, especially prioritizing the ones where they might have information that they can get through either the like reset a password, or they might already have access to the account. So contact your financial institutions and tell them about the fraud so that they can stop transactions. If your passwords have been compromised, updating your passwords and making sure those are strong passwords is very important. Keep records of everything that has happened so that you can go to the police and have a very comprehensive report. And that's the next step, is to report the fraud that happened, report it. This is, I think, a challenge in the United States, is that there are a lot of different agencies that are investigating fraud. And so it's hard for people to know who they should report to. Um, and my advice, which I think becomes exhausting for folks, but is report it to as many places as you can. So report it to your state and local police, report it to your state and local regulators. If you have a consumer protection bureau in your state, report it there, and then do the same at the federal level, because there's so many different agencies involved. And it just takes getting it to the right person in order to get action. You mentioned I used to work for the FBI. Like there were particular FBI offices that were very good at investigating cryptocurrency, and other offices that haven't developed that know-how yet. And same thing for the Secret Service, right? And same thing for HSI and the IRS. So like you just have to find the right person who might be able to help you and might be able to act quickly enough to help you claw your money back. We already talked about freezing your credit. That's very important. And then I think warning friends and family that this has happened so that they're aware, both for education purposes and sort of normalizing that fraud happens, but also because if they have access to any of your contacts, or if they've bought that data or scraped it off the internet, they might start approaching those people next. And then, oh, there's the last thing. Oh, the other thing that's important to know is that there is sort of a scam journey that a lot of victims go through, where I'll use the Mexican timeshare fraud scam. So Mexican cartels have been, for the past decade, targeting people who own timeshares in Mexico and calling them and saying, you've got this timeshare in Acapulco, I don't know. and I've got a buyer who wants to buy it for 20% more than you paid for it, and you just have to pay these broker fees, and then we'll be able to sell your timeshare for way more than you paid for it. And it sounds great, right? You haven't been able to go down very much, like you didn't really use it. Okay, great. I'd love to make some money off of this. So you pay the broker fees, and then they say, okay, now there's some taxes that you have to pay. It just sort of keeps going. And then once you realize it's a scam, then you might have people call and say you were paying this illegal business, and now you are under investigation because you committed a crime by sending them money. And so then they start like a government impersonation scam, and the scam starts to evolve, right? So we often see the government impersonation scams, and to your earlier point, like they've looked up who are the real names of real authorities. So when I go Google so and so, like Mexican Federal Police, like they're a real person. There's news articles about them and interviews with them, so it sounds very believable. And then it'll evolve after that into a recovery scam where somebody will say, we're calling from the FBI. You just have to pay this fee in order to get your case expedited. And so there's like a real trajectory that scams take. And so making sure that victims understand that, like, once they've been scammed, people are going to continue trying to scam them just in different ways is, I think, very important. And AARP has this Fraud Watch Network, which is a great resource to folks if you're not aware of it. We have these support groups, and recently one of the women in the support group was so excited. She had tons of money stolen from her, and she was like, "This is great. The Treasury Department has called me. I just have to like pay this fee, and then they'll expedite my case over everybody else's." And the support group leader was like, "Nope. Stop! You're not having that meeting with them. Don't send them that money. That is a recovery scam." So, I think also educating people once they've been a victim of like how much more of a target they would potentially be, because scammers, it'll be the same scammer just contacting and pretending to be different people, but they also sell and share between each other what they call sucker lists, so people who have already been the victim of a scam, and so they view as being more susceptible to that in the future. So it really can snowball and be pretty awful.
It sounds incredibly awful. And something else, and I remember you talking a bit about this on your panel at AI Battlefront, is the human side of it, is the stigma part of it, and people feeling embarrassed or ashamed, mortified that they've been taken in. Because as you said, there's a sort of a stereotype that it's somebody who doesn't really have it together who is falling victim to this, as opposed to somebody who thinks of themselves as well educated or alert and aware. So what about that side? And I know that this is something that AARP has certainly spent a lot of time and attention on, which is the human side of admitting, yes, I have been taken in. And then, as you said, you do need to alert people around you, because as we saw, as our own organization was targeted, they didn't just, once they tried it out on spoofing emails from me, then they started in with the hotel rooms, and they were I mean, it's everybody sort of in the circle. So it's so important to get the word out and let people know what's going on. But at the same time, there's a very human side to this as well, and stigma. I'm really curious to kind of hear what you're seeing, and also how, what AARP has been doing.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the stigma is such a big problem, and is the reason that many people don't report the fraud, either to their family or to law enforcement. And I think that ends up resulting in an even bigger problem. The number that I was giving earlier, the $16.6 billion reported to the FBI, typically what we say is about only 10% of victims of fraud actually report the fraud. And so, like, think about what those real numbers are, and all of the information that law enforcement is missing because it wasn't reported to them, which is harms their ability to prioritize their investigations. But on the language side of things, AARP has been doing a lot of research in what we call the blame and shame side of things. And we have a report called Blame and Shame in the Context of Financial Fraud. And it talks about how differently we treat victims of fraud and scams compared to victims of other types of crimes, right? And how changing that language can help to shift the narrative around scams and fraud. So if somebody is the victim of a scam, we're much more likely to say things like they were duped or they fell for it. But if somebody came and like burglarized their house, nobody would ever say that. They would talk about it with a much different tone. So I think really framing the way that we are speaking about scams and speaking about scam victims to put the onus on the criminals, so saying things like, rather than they gave their money away to somebody in China, a criminal stole their money from them, and really putting the onus on the criminal. I don't have to tell this group how important language is, but I think that's something that we are really trying to socialize with law enforcement, with the media, that the way that we are all talking about scams and scam victims is really important. And it's important to sort of normalizing this as an issue, as well as improving reporting. Because if people do, I mean, the amount of anxiety and shame, depression that we hear about from folks, it's just awful. And we also see, unfortunately, a big uptick in suicide with folks who have been the victims of fraud, which is just incredibly tragic. We've seen, and that's true across all ages, but there's an uptick in teenagers who've been the victims of sextortion scams, teenagers and 20-somethings. And there's all these stories about kids who just don't know what to do, and they don't want to tell their parents this has happened to them because it's so embarrassing, and kids don't like talking to their parents about sex, etc. And there've been a lot of cases where people have taken their own lives, unfortunately. So, I think shifting that narrative and normalizing it, and also being more clear about this happens to everyone, right? Fraud doesn't just happen to old people. It doesn't happen. It's not just uneducated people. You can't be too smart or too rich or too educated or too, I don't know what, to be a victim of fraud. It happens to everyone. And so really shifting that narrative, I think, is very important.
And I really appreciate especially your comment about teens, because that's another place where we are again seeing the technology driving so many of these scams, the artificial intelligence, the models that are now able to take just regular snapshots and create nude images from them,
Yeah.
and then spread those as if that was the young person posting it. And again, going back to the human factors here, in my lab's research into teen online safety, we have actually found that the single most protective thing has nothing to do with technology. It's not an app. It is belief in a parent's unconditional love. The more that a teen believes that their parent loves them unconditionally, the less likely they are to have a tragic outcome from one of these events, whether it's that they fall victim to a romance scammer or a sextortion, any of it. And so I think, especially as I consider this group and what we do and how we work with people, the fact that it is technology driven, but it will be human solved, is kind of core importance. And so we have been talking a lot about kind of us as people who have been targeted by these scammers, by these criminals. We also work with individuals, we work with teams, we work with organizations. That's the heart of what we do, is how do we help people to thrive? And I know that our clients are facing this every day. whether they're executives who are being targeted, being impersonated, or their employees are being targeted. This is a reality not just for individuals, but also for organizations and for companies, and family businesses in particular, again, because of the ability to extract data and then take advantage of technology to help craft these narratives and stories, and bring all these details together. So I'm curious, Clark, for your perspective on, first, how can we best help our clients prepare to deal with these situations? What advice and counsel can we offer to the executives that we work with, about, just about considering this and planning for it? Because as much as we don't want it to be the case, it's not if, it's when.
Yeah, I think being very clear about communications and how people will communicate within a company and outside of a company, and making that very clear to your customers. Like, I think the American Bankers Association has done a good job with their "Banks Don't Say That." Or no, not correct. Well, now I'm messing up their slogan. Banks Don't Ask That, I think is what their slogan is. And like really doing a lot of education around, like, this is how a bank is going to contact you. They're never going to ask you for these things. Of course, people still end up being the victims of scams, so we know that education is not the solution necessarily here. But I think it's good to be aware of, as you're communicating with both the people in your company, like, these are the only ways we will contact you, and if this happens, like, ask more questions and reach out. I think it's good to have those practices set up internally, and some examples of that I can think of. I've heard about this less recently, but it used to be really common. Like, you would get people impersonating high level, like C-suite folks at a company, and they would text more junior people in the company and say, "Hey, I need you to run this errand. I need gift cards for this event that's coming up." Maybe they had pulled off of the internet. So can you go pick those up? And we're going to give them out as prizes, or whatever the case may be. And I was talking to one of the attorneys at AARP about that, actually, and she said, that happened to me. I worked for this really demanding partner, and it just didn't seem out of the ordinary to me that he would ask me for gift cards. But instead of sending the pictures like he had asked in the text message, I came and brought them to his office, and he was like, "Well, no, that wasn't me. I didn't ask you for gift cards." And so then they realized that he had been impersonated. But I think he also felt a little embarrassed that she thought that, like, they had been very demanding in the email. And I think he was a little embarrassed that she believed that really could have been him. But I've also gotten those sorts of outreaches from the CEO of AARP, and at my last job, the CEO of Chain Analysis. Somebody asked me to go get gift cards or send them Bitcoin. And so being clear about with your employees, like, this is how we will communicate with you. And, like, if anyone ever asks you to do these things, like, these are ways that you can verify that it's actually them. But also with customers of your company, being very clear about, this is the way we will communicate with you. If you get emails and they're not from this email address, or if you get phone alerts and they're not from this phone number, or this is a page where you can double check those communications. This is a number you can call. Having those sort of fail safes so that people feel like they can double check things as they're seeing something that might set off red flags.
And I'm curious, it's inevitable. Our clients will be attacked, and some of the scams will be effective. What thoughts do you have in terms of how you see companies responding to instances where their employees or even their executives have been taken in by these scams? And what should we be thinking about as we are coaching our executive clients when this unfortunately inevitably happens to some of them?
Yeah, I think having reporting procedures in place is and empowering people to use them is very important. There's a very scary example of a bank in Kansas that collapsed because the CEO of the bank was the victim of an investment scam. Um, it was what some people call a pig butchering scam. There's a lot of people who don't like that terminology, but it's um, a type of investment scam where there's sort of a long-term development of the victim before they go in and steal all of the money. It often will start with a text message or a Facebook message, or um, I get added to all of these different WhatsApp groups that are like fake investment groups, and they'll to develop you as a victim over weeks or months, and that's what happened to this bank CEO, and he ended up not only sending them his personal money, but the bank's assets. And in the end, the bank had to be taken over by the FDIC, and it collapsed. So it was a pretty terrible situation. And you've got to think there were people within the bank who suspected something was happening, but maybe didn't feel empowered to speak up or go to the right people, or that there weren't clear procedures in place for them to do that. So I think that's something that's very important for people to be thinking about, is how do you report this, and do your employees know, and being clear, like there won't be retaliation if you're reporting something that you suspect and it turns out it's not that. I think those are good things for companies to be thinking about.
So, Clark, this is incredibly helpful. And I know that there will be more questions and a desire for more information. What are some resources that you recommend for people to educate themselves? And then also things that we would be able to share with those that we work with, or even family and friends.
Sure. So AARP, I mentioned, has the Fraud Watch Network, which puts out a lot of stories. We have a great podcast that talks about the in-depth different types of scams, and so they'll go through with the victim and talk about a particular scam and what happened, and then experts come on and talk about trends in that space and ways to prevent that. The Fraud Watch Network also puts out alerts. So depending on what is most common in the reports that the Fraud Watch Network is getting, they'll send out alerts to share those with people. So recently, one of the alerts was about the DMV impersonation scam or toll scams. There was a big uptick in those a couple of months ago. I'm sure everyone on this call got a text from somebody pretending to be your local toll company. I'm from Vermont and we don't have tolls, and they're still so easier to identify, right? Because they were spoofing on 802 number. But I live in the DMV area in DC, and we have a lot of tolls here. And so it did make me pause and say to my husband, "Wait, did we not pay the Easy Pass? Do we not have that on auto pay?" And he was like, "No, it's not. That's not real." The shipping scams for a long time have been a big trend, and we put out alerts on those. The things that I'm seeing the most right now are job search scams, where I'm getting contacted by a lot of recruiters who are definitely not recruiters, who are looking to hire and offering jobs with great benefits at Amazon and Walmart, and like they're impersonating big well-known companies that probably have, if you go to their website, job postings with that job title. Yes, the tech scams are wild. We also were seeing for a while an uptick in scams being sent to your physical mail, because I think people have grown skeptical of their email and of text messages. But mail, I think for the most part, people still trust. So it's going to take the time to physically mail you things, but that's happening a lot. And the U.S. Postal Inspection Service has done some takedowns, some pretty large takedowns of people who were facilitating fraud via the mail. Some other resources that might be helpful. we were talking about the blame and shame narrative. AARP has, let me just put the link in the chat. This is our website that looks at like better ways to phrase things when you're talking about fraud victims. Like the example I gave earlier, rather than saying she gave her money away to this scammer, criminal stole her money. And talking about the impact of that. And I think that the blame and shame report is probably linked in there, but if it's not, I can share that as well. For older folks, we also have something called Senior Planet, which does a lot of trainings on, all sorts of things in the digital space, anything from like how to use a rideshare app to how to sell things on eBay to how to identify scams and fraud. And I think that's a helpful resource for folks who have older parents they might be worried about and who might need a little bit more hand holding with some of the newer technologies, right? My husband's grandmother, Nancy, is really into Facebook, and she's got her computer, she's pretty with it, but like some of it is still confusing to her. So those sorts of courses have been very helpful. And helps you to become more visually aware and better able to recognize things. The FTC and the FBI in particular also put out a lot of good material. The FTC has a lot of things that you can download, like different one-pagers on different types of fraud, which can be useful to folks. So those are some of the things I would mention. And then the other thing I was thinking about as we were talking that might be of interest to this group in particular is we've been doing more research around dementia and fraud. And fraud, it turns out, is probably, this is not that surprising to folks, but is an early indicator that somebody may later on be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's. So if you start to see people be victims of fraud, like having that in the back of your mind and thinking about maybe it's time to go in for a checkup and do a cognitive screening is not a bad idea. AARP has done that research, I think, with the MIT Age Lab, it's called. So might be of interest.
Thank you. I want to open it up to questions from the group, comments. Clark, I mean, just so helpful and rich information, and both scary, but also timely. And so if anyone wants to raise their hand or just come off mute, feel free to drop it in the comments. While people are thinking, Clark, a question for you. What's something you've seen lately that kind of gives you hope in this space?
So I think that because the amount of scams and fraud has reached a point where, like Shannon said in the comments, there's so many tech scams. And I was saying earlier, we don't really trust our technology anymore because we just view it as like a way for scammers to reach us. Or at least I have started feeling that way. I think industry is really starting to feel like it's an important reputational thing for them, even if they don't have a regulatory obligation to reimburse victims or to stop particular calls or share information about particular customers or those who they think are conducting scams. And have the authority to shut that down. They want people to use their platforms, right? So they want, Facebook wants you to use Facebook. They want you to trust their platform and not think like, oh, this is just a way for spammers to message me on the Facebook Messenger. WhatsApp wants you to trust WhatsApp, and when you start getting added to all of these spammy groups, like I'm less inclined to use WhatsApp. Same thing with text message. So we've seen industry really start to recognize that they need to do more. And so there have been some national level task forces. The event that you and I were at was, a great example of that. There's a lot of big industry members there. The Aspen Institute has also been running a Stop Scams task force where they brought together all of the big banks, all the telecom, social media, all of these massive companies, together with consumer groups and law enforcement and regulators. And they're going to be putting out a report in a couple of days, I think, about a national strategy. I also think we've seen at the congressional level a lot more attention to this. I think that members of Congress are hearing about this a lot from their constituents, and they have a lot of caseworkers who are getting outreach from fraud victims who want help connecting with the FBI. Or another big trend that we see is people will have money stolen from them and then they'll owe taxes on it because it was taken from their 401k or a brokerage account, some other tax deferred account. And so the stories are awful. People end up having to declare bankruptcy and set up payment plans with the IRS. And it really just adds salt to the wound. And so I think we've seen a lot more engagement in Congress as well. There've been a lot of hearings. I used to get like one bill a month sent to me for review, and I've been getting like 3 or 4 a week. So it's exciting to see that this is something that people want to tackle. And I think also unique in that this is a time, I was saying this right before a shutdown, right? Or likely shutdown, when it's very hard to find bipartisan work in DC. And we do think the fraud and scam space is a place where there is bipartisan work, and so that is very helpful to me.
I'll echo that, because something I've noticed, I get the weekly updates from my congressional representative, as well as from my state senators, my state representatives. And something I have noticed is that at the very end of the email, where they usually just have a throwaway line about contact us for constituent services, they now have like a separate call line for help with fraud. And I know that like my state representative is not the place that I would go to do the reporting. But what I've seen is that they are now putting in place like a navigation to help people to do that. And so it is hopeful to me to see that there are constituent services being offered, that there seem to be more resources. Because again, it seems really baffling that after you have been scammed online, you would go Google what to do about your scam. And Shannon made a really important point in the chat, that the prevalence of these scams makes even innocuous, trusted relationships suddenly seem questionable. It's incredibly destabilizing. Because if you have anything out of the ordinary, you start to wonder, well, is this a scam? What kind of a scam could this be? It seems very far-fetched or outlandish. And at the same time, that's what we're hearing about constantly.
Yeah.
Shannon, thank you for the comment.
The other thing, my other little PSA is check scams have become more and more prevalent. And what will happen is people will steal checks out of the mail. When you get your checks from the bank, it's pretty recognizable. I'm sure they make the package look recognizable because they want you to know that those are your checks and to open that up and take your checks out. But criminals will use those arrow keys, which will help them open mailboxes, and they'll steal checks out. They'll also steal you write your grandkid a check for their birthday or something. They'll steal those, and then they take pictures of the front and back, and they sell that on Telegram groups, other places. Telegram seems to be the place where I hear about it the most. It's like a encrypted messaging platform, and it's become a big problem for banks because these are real checks, right? And so like you can change the information on them and alter them. And their systems are looking for, is this a counterfeit check? It's not a counterfeit check, it's an altered check. And so that also causes problems for them. Like there's different laws about who has the liability to reimburse the customer, and that has become really challenging too. So use fewer checks. Is my other PSA. Don't click on links, freeze your credit, don't use checks. Well, I appreciate you having me tonight. Be happy to chat with anyone or share any additional resources if you need them. But um, it's a really important topic, and as I was saying to Liz before we kick things off, I think um, the other thing that is often challenging is that people who are the victim of a scam don't often realize that that's what's happening. They'll be in denial about it. It's very hard for family, for bank tellers, other people to convince them like this is a scam that's happening. And one of the most dramatic stories I heard about that was from a colleague whose friend, their father got outreach, and it was a government impersonation scam. He owed taxes. He had to take out cash from the bank. The bank teller tried to convince him it was a scam, but couldn't, and it was his money, so she gave him the $25,000. And he told his wife and his daughter that he was going to take the money to pay the IRS. They had told him to take it to it was like a mailboxes, etc. type of store where you go deposit it in one of the boxes there. And his wife and his daughter were convinced it was a scam, but he convinced him. And so they ended up calling the state police, and a state trooper pulled him over. I can't believe they were able to get the state trooper to do that. But that was like, he didn't until the trooper pulled him over and was like, what are you doing? This is a scam. You need to stop. That was the first time that he sort of believed that might be true. So I think that's an important place to think more about too, is how do you convince people that what they are experiencing is a scam because it is so real to them. I'd love to see more research on that.
And I think as well for many people in our group, we work with family businesses, we work with closely held businesses, and frequently there's division between siblings, or there's discord between between generations, and things like this can become weapons where someone will dig in their heels because they think that it's just their kid is trying to get the business from them, and convince them that they've fallen prey to a scam, and so therefore they're going to believe it even harder. You can't tell me. It's the human side of this is so very real, even though so much of these scams is generated using the latest technology. It often comes down to just the most basic elements of our humanity. Well, we are approaching the end of the hour. If anyone has any we do have time for one last question if anyone has one. Otherwise, I'll simply say, Clark, thank you so much. And just applause for all the work that you do and your colleagues do at AARP. I know that you are so on the cutting edge of trying to address all of this. And I'm really glad that we have you in our corner. I am really glad you're one of the good guys.
Well, thank you for having me, and please use the AARP as a resource. This is something that is a huge priority for our members, and we've put a lot of work and research into this and into our fraud reduction network. I didn't talk about it because it didn't feel quite as relevant to this group, but we also have a really large program where we work with about 2,000 financial institutions to train their staff on different indicators, and so it's an area where we're doing a lot of work and are always happy to be a resource to folks and hear the latest things that you're hearing about as well. I think talking about it can only help. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And maybe that's even an opportunity for collaboration between SCP and AARP in the future, around family businesses and business transition, and when companies leaders are targeted for this. So I know that there's got to be a there. Again, thank you to everybody who took time to join this evening. Appreciate you. Anyone who might be new, welcome. And again, Clark, I just can't thank you enough for taking your time to do this and really just share all of your insight.
Well, happy to. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.